This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include political analyst Jeanne John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and political consultant Doug Raymond from down east. This should be a good show this week. We begin with good news about our highest ever graduation rate, talk about Governor McCrory signing the voter change law, discuss why 81 of our 100 counties have higher unemployment rates, and we'll debate whether we need a debate on capital punishment. Let's get started. We talk a lot about public education on this show, and too frequently we're talking about problems in K-12 education. But last week, we got a good report card. The graduation rate for high school students was announced at 82.5%, beating last year's 80% mark. Since 2006, when the four-year graduation rate was just 68%, our state has put increased emphasis on helping students graduate on time. Chris, you've been following this story for many years. What's our state done to jump from 68 to 82% in 7 years?
Well, first of all, you got to remember it's not 7 years. The kids who just graduated from high school last year started school 13 years before that. They started in kindergarten. So this is so in effect we're talking about kids in school in 1999 and 2000, 2001. Dropout prevention was a priority of the General Assembly for a long time. We had communities and schools really take off in North Carolina. We did have early childhood education expand. We did have Smart Start expand. It's tough to pinpoint one thing, but clear teacher pay at that time was 28th, I believe, in the country, not 48th. So there were a lot of things and a lot of investments in public schools over the 13 years. I think that's the most important thing to remember. This is not something that happens overnight. In fact, it's a lagging indicator. If we disinvest in public schools, we're not going to see the effect for several years down the road.
John, I think the question that a lot of our viewers would like an answer to is, are we just handing these kids diplomas to make our graduation rate look good, or are they really qualified to graduate from high school?
There's a little bit of evidence for both. There's evidence that there is some improvement in some grades, though that has leveled off in recent years. But there's also disquieting evidence that students going to community colleges are more likely to be remediated than they used to be. Not hugely more, but somewhat more. The biggest problem with this entire analysis, Tom, though, is that it misses the obvious point, which is that graduation rates are going up around the country. North Carolina's graduation rate rise has not been larger than every other state's. In fact, if you look at the southeastern states in recent years, as graduation rates were rising in North Carolina, they were rising even faster in Florida, in Tennessee, Texas, and other states. So obviously there are things going on in North Carolina that have helped boost the graduation rate a bit, but there is a larger trend going on. And one of the things that analysts across the country are trying to really look at is the effects of the Great Recession. There is a dramatic jump in North Carolina and other states. North Carolina had a gradual improvement in graduation rates and went, well, that also happened in lots of other places. One of the factors is probably kids who would have dropped out to take a job in the 11th or 12th grade.
Don't have a job.
The teenage unemployment rate is so high that they stay in school.
Jeanne, one of the associate superintendents in Wake County said that the graduation rate is a key benchmark, a key indicator of the quality of a school system. How high up the line so far as evaluating schools is high school graduation rate?
Well, certainly it's critical because education's linked to crime and poverty. Those are the biggest drains on society. So if you can keep kids in school and educate them, it helps society as a whole. So I think it's a pretty high indicator. And then adding on to what Chris said, have been specific programs that targeted with federal funds, homeless. The homeless have difficulty staying in school because of transportation issues. Right. So there's been key funding that targeted certain areas that have helped with it.
But dovetailing on something that Chris said, Doug, I'd like to ask you, for the past several legislatures have reduced funding to education. And educators are obviously complaining that we're spending less per pupil, we're paying teachers less than we have ranking-wise in the meantime, we have the highest graduation rates ever. How do you reconcile these factors?
Well, some of that, first of all, you have to argue whether they really have. There was just an article out in the Charlotte Observer just a few days ago that the Charlotte-Mecklenburg system their per pupil spending has gone up this year. So you can make that argument that sometimes it hasn't. There has definitely been targeting toward at-risk students. They've done a better job of identifying which students are at risk and bringing them up. And for fear of Chris coming across the table at me, I do want to point out, too, George W. Bush and No Child Left Behind. This was the target year for some of those things, some of those goals to be met. So I think that also has effect on what John was talking about across the board.
Remember that when that was passed under Bush, there was a Democrat and Republican thing. Yeah. I mean, I had some concerns about No Child Left Behind, and I continue to have them. But objectively, it probably had some effect on the improvement of graduation rates across the country.
And we can sit here and discuss this all we want to, but folks, this is good news. There is no question about that, and we need to applaud that. Now, I think the question that we need to end on here is, okay, we know that we'll never have 100% graduation rate. So what is an ideal rate that we could expect, an optimum rate we could expect for high school graduation? Let's go around the table real quick, John.
When you get to about 90%, it seems hard to go further than that without reducing your standards to meaninglessness.
I agree with that, and also to what John said in his point, too. I'd like to see more emphasis on not just getting them a diploma, but getting them the skills they need to get into the workforce.
And remember, this graduation rate is a kid who enters the 9th grade and 4 years later graduates.
Right.
That's what 82%. That's right. So I think we may get up to 85 or 90, I hope, one day. I hope we get higher than that in 5 or 6 years, and when you add in all the other ways kids who drop out can go back, I think we can do better.
Yeah, Jeanne? I would say 85 to 90%, and then hopefully, we can do better with some other options for skills.
Well, you can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view us anytime you like. And while at ncspin.com, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. And you can follow us on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. 4 ways to keep the conversation going: ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, Twitter at NCSpin Tweets, and Spin Cycle. We look forward to hearing from you. When we come back after these messages, Governor McCrory signs voting laws into law.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel, as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians, that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception: keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
As expected, Governor Pat McCrory signed the legislation that made big changes in our election laws, despite a petition drive started by our Attorney General. McCrory said, "Let me be direct. Many of those from the extreme left who've been criticizing photo ID have been using scare tactics. They're more interested in divisive politics than in ensuring that no one's vote is disenfranchised by a fraudulent ballot. Protecting the integrity of every vote cast is among the most important duties I have as governor." But State NAACP President William Barber disagreed. He said, "We believe the governor is choosing to be on the wrong side of history, to trample through the blood of martyrs and desecrate the graves of our heroes who fought to push this nation forward in terms of voting rights." Well, within hours after the bill was signed, 2 lawsuits were filed challenging the law. Doug, this has become the most contentious bill passed in a very significant legislative session with 2 lawsuits looming. The big question is whether or not Attorney General Roy Cooper can defend this law on behalf of the state, since we know he is opposed to it.
Exactly, and from what I'm hearing, there's a couple things that could happen. Because he did make such a strong statement, he could recuse himself from it. But there's a couple other things that I think are being overlooked here. Number one, Roy Cooper's office is not like Perry Mason. It's not one attorney sitting there doing all the work. He has a fine staff that works on a variety of issues, so it's not just Roy Cooper that's doing the work. The second thing is the legislature passed a bill at the end of the session that gave them the option of bringing in independent counsel and basically going around the Attorney General's office on this issue. And
is that because they suspected that something like this might
possibly,
happen?
But you remember, we have a precedent very recently with the redistricting. Right. You remember, and the redistricting, you would argue, that might, have had even greater ramifications with this when you look at control of the legislature for 10 years. And there wasn't any problem with Roy Cooper on that, the way that was handled. So I don't have a big concern about it.
Jeanne, the original intent of this bill was voter ID. And then it was amended and added on to, and we got this Christmas tree of other things that came with it. Had the legislation just stopped at voter ID, do you think we'd have seen these lawsuits?
I think we still would have seen lawsuits, but the polling numbers would have remained high because most people supported the identification part. When they tacked everything else on, we see the polling numbers go down significantly because all of these other things are not wanted by people in either party.
Chris, the Republicans claim the Democrats had sort of rigged or changed the voting laws so as to ensure that their base voters got to the polls and voted, and what they're doing is basically leveling the field. At the end of the day, isn't this mostly about politics? I mean, if the Democrats had their chance to impact voting laws, why shouldn't the Republicans also have a chance?
First of all, I think it wasn't too many years ago that I thought we all lamented low voter turnout, and we thought the best thing for democracy was the most people who vote, the best. It's better for all of us, whatever your party, whoever you vote for. But it seems now that's not the case. We want to restrict voting. In fact, the same day that Governor McCrory signed the bill and said he doesn't want politics to decide where early voting sites are, a Republican Board of Elections in Watauga County closed an early voting site in Appalachian State, made everybody there vote in one place.
Which, by the way, they're not supposed to do, because the law says they're supposed to keep them open.
And the second thing that's amazing to me is I'd have a little more faith in the governor's statement if he actually knew what he was talking about. He said that every voting precinct in North Carolina is going to be open for 2 weeks before the election on one radio station. The next radio station said every voting precinct in North Carolina is going to be open 1 week before the election, which is neither of those things is true. And then he said they stopped pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds because of the cost. The Board of Elections, controlled by Republicans, said it's a nominal cost. It doesn't cost anything.
John, Becky Gray from the John Locke Foundation, from your staff, wrote an op-ed piece this week, and she said basically what's going on here is that we're just bringing North Carolina voter laws to parity and compliance, essentially, with most of the rest of the states in the nation. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, with one exception. So when it comes to early voting and same-day voter registration and a lot of the other changes, North Carolina is now going to be more liberal than New York. And we were previously more liberal than New York, so no big deal. The one difference is the voter ID requirement, because North Carolina's does not allow IDs issued from public universities to be used for identification. Most of the other states with those requirements do allow college IDs. That's the one area, but that's about all I can discover.
I want to ask Jeanne and Chris, since I think both of you are on this side of the equation, on what basis do the ACLU and NAACP feel like they stand a good chance of winning with these lawsuits? What's their reasoning for feeling like that they can take on and challenge these lawsuits and win?
Well, I think the ACLU feels like that they have individuals who they've reached out or have contacted them that will not be able to have access to the identification needed in this process because of a whole range of issues. So I think,
but can't the state just come out and say, hey, wait a minute, here are all these other states that have these same laws?
In addition, based on what the Constitution says in terms of what's required for voting, this bill goes in much excess to what it says there.
I think it's worth pointing out, too, once again, there's a voter ID issue, which I don't think is needed, and I think it restricts the right of some people to vote, unfortunately. There are 49 pages in this legislation. 3 are about voter ID. 46 are about other election law changes. There were no hearings, no discussion, no testimony. Nobody even knew these things were coming up. They came out at the last minute. We've made the most sweeping changes to our election laws almost in the dark of night, and nobody even knows what they do.
But how is that going to help them prevail? I mean,
what's going to help them prevail? Of course it's going to help them prevail.
That's not a grounds for a lawsuit.
No, I was just talking about in general.
Okay, well, my question was about the lawsuit.
I mean, you can make some public policy arguments about each aspect.
Yeah.
I think as a legal matter, their arguments don't make any fundamental sense. They've already been addressed in previous recent court cases. I think you can make some practical arguments about some of these provisions, but probably not constitutional claims.
One of the lawyers from Duke University was on WRAL TV News this week saying that he didn't really see any basis for which the lawsuits would prevail.
The problem,
particularly an injunction.
Well, the general
let me
problem
chime in here, because let's just start with the photo ID. I agree there's a whole lot that was added to that bill, but it's not going to be implemented until 2016. The legislature put over $1 million for voter education programs to and the other thing is, we've got liberals that believe that people have the right to access to cell phones, and we get them cell phones. We believe that they have rights to internet access, and we get them internet access. How until 2016 can we not get voters that don't have a photo ID,
a photo ID? Thinks buying Sudafed is equivalent to voting. I mean, it's not equivalent to voting where I come from, and I don't understand the relevancy of all these arguments the GOP was making today about what other states do. We don't have national elections. Constitutions differ by state. Voting differs by state.
The relevance is very clear. The relevance is the claim was made that North Carolina has this radical voter suppression statute, which basically makes North Carolina's elections like everybody else's. That's the point.
You just said
it does. How is it not?
Well, it's not because you can't use a University of North Carolina ID. And you know what's interesting?
That is a very small number of people involved.
Then why did they put it in there? They must have thought it was to their advantage, John. It's all about who votes and who doesn't vote.
I understand the argument, but the reason they did that is because private college IDs would not be allowed, public college IDs would be allowed. They decided to be consistent. I think you could argue the other way, but it is not a constitutional matter whether college students are going to use their IDs.
Courts are going to have to decide if they're asking people if they're undue burdens to get an ID. You know what you have to do to get a ID now to vote? If you're a college student, you have to have several forms of identification, primarily your original Social Security card. I wonder how many folks watching can put their hands on their original Social Security card. I wonder how many 92-year-old people who've never had a valid driver's license, like the woman who's a plaintiff in this lawsuit, can find their birth certificate in their files to go to the Board of Elections and get an ID to vote after she's voted for 25 or 30 years in North Carolina.
Or if they've moved here from another state,
One
at a time.
How is that plaintiff going to get into the courtroom to watch her case? Does she not have a valid, or could not be provided a valid photo ID? Frankly, the claim is absurd.
Well,
it's absolutely absurd.
Not all courtrooms require you to have an ID to enter them.
To get into the federal courtroom for this case?
Well, federal maybe, but I don't know if they all do or not.
I think that the obvious solution for the small number of people who are having trouble getting photo IDs is to get them valid photo IDs and move on.
You know, it's interesting that Governor McCrory says we're going to let the DMV do it. He spent half his campaign complaining about how long it took him to get his driver's license at the DMV.
Yeah.
He did, and now we're going to have a 92-year-old woman down there waiting.
We're going to have a 92-year-old woman who can't get into a courtroom to argue a case about not having an ID.
Okay, here's the one thing I can guarantee you about this topic is that we will be talking about it again. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about the economy. Safe ground.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
How bad do you want to become a champion? More than you want to breathe?
We see our student athletes and coaches' commitment to championships every day.
Your support enables us to create a competitive advantage that will help the Wolfpack compete for conference and national championships.
Our work at NC State is just beginning. We are asking more from ourselves, our players, and now we are asking more from you. What is your championship commitment?
We now return to NC Spin.
Our state's economy seems stagnant, with the unemployment rate for June at 8.8%, the same as it was in May. The really bad news is that the unemployment rate rose in 81 of our 100 counties, with 44 of them reporting rates higher than 10%. So far, the first half of 2013 has been the most disappointing for job growth since the beginning of the recovery. But NC State economist Mike Walden is predicting that by 2015, North Carolina's unemployment rate will be 6.8%, 2 points lower than it is currently. John, after reading Walden's predictions, somebody wrote on our NC Spin Facebook page that meteorologists have a better track record predicting weather than economists have of predicting the economy. What does Mike Walden see we don't?
I don't think we should be insulting meteorologists, for one thing. Some of them are my best friends. But what Mike Walden does every month for NC State University is an index of leading economic indicators for North Carolina. They include things like first-time unemployment insurance claims, building permits, manufacturing wages. And what he found over last year is a increase in the index of about 2% year to year. Last year, we gained 90,000 jobs in North Carolina. The previous year, 50,000 or so. So, judging by his index, a 90 to 100,000 job gain in 2013, and maybe the similar gain in 2014, is reasonable. But I went and called.
So that's not going to drop the unemployment rate 2 points.
Yes, it would. That would take it down that far. But I called Mike and asked him a little bit more about it, and he was sort of less confident when I asked him the second time. And one of the reasons is that if you look at the job growth this year, it doesn't track with the index. In other words, you might think based upon the economic index we ought to be adding jobs every month, but we've had a very weak job trend in 2013. So it is more likely that our job growth is going to be well below 100,000.
And Doug, we talked about the fact that 81 of the 100 counties had higher unemployment rates and 44 had more than 10%, and a large number of them are in the eastern part of our state. What's it like down there?
Well, it's like, as I said, I go from the coast to Raleigh, and when I'm in Raleigh, I see signs of economic growth. I see cranes, I see buildings. Once you get past I-95, you don't see a lot of construction going on in both corporate construction or even home construction. And I think, especially in the east, agriculture is important, but construction really drives the economy in the east, and it's almost non-existent in the east.
We're running out of time in this segment, but one of the things that we've got to talk about with this is the length of time, the lag of time that it's taking to process unemployment claims. Chris, what's up with that, and why can't we fix it?
Well, the NC FAST system, you mean the NC FAST problems?
Well, no, I'm talking about the unemployment, people filing for unemployment. And it's taking up to 4 months.
Well, that's a good question, and we need to fix it. And we're also having trouble when somebody files for unemployment and they're either denied or they get it and the employer appeals. We're having a huge backlog with appeals. Dale Falwell has got to fix that
One person was eliminated who knew that system forward and backwards, and then they're short-staffed on processing it given the number of claims they have.
We'll be back with closing comments in just a moment.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Is your business or trade organization looking for a great North Raleigh address? This beautiful, recently updated office building has 3 spacious offices perfect for law firms, accountants, agencies, and associations of any size. Our beautiful lobby boasts attractive finishes and unique Raleigh artwork. We provide ample parking and quick access to both 440 and 540 right at the corner of Falls of the Neuse and Spring Forest Road. Call us today at 919-832-1416 to schedule a tour with the owner.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com. Do you have questions about the foods you eat and the farmers that feed us? If so, register to attend the Food Dialogues North Carolina. This free panel discussion will include food and farming experts talking about what's on our plates, the importance of consumer choice, and how farming and food production have changed over the years. The Food Dialogues North Carolina is September 19th at the Raleigh Convention Center. Registration is free, but space is limited. Visit fooddialogues.com to register now.
I always loved it when one of the national moderators would say, "Tell me something I don't know." John, tell me something.
We were just talking about economic statistics, and there will be new jobs numbers for North Carolina coming out this week. And we'll have to see if we're still on a stagnant trend or if job creation is going to uptick.
Doug Raymond.
It'll be interesting to see how the Republican-led legislature reacts to McCrory vetoes of some of their bills and whether they want to call back in session to try to override.
Chris?
I think there'll be some growing outrage over raises given to two top HHS employees, one a 24-year-old policy consultant who got a 37% raise and now makes $87,000 a year at a time when state employees and teachers got nothing.
I think there'll be some interesting investigations in DHHS over some contracts that they recently signed.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. We hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.